lives, then hopefully it's very clear that as rational beings, we would weight our behavior and our life towards what's going to happen to us in the infinite future relative to the next couple of decades or however long it might be, right? So the reason that we're Buddhists and the reason that we practice is to address our infinite future rather than just our immediate short-term circumstances in this life, right? So tonight we're on to the fourth of the 15 courses that ACI does. We finished the Perfection of Wisdom, which is mostly Refuge and Nirvana. Last week we graduated from our meditation course, right? Based on Master Kamala Shila from around 800 AD. And now we're on to Proof of Future Lives this week and next week. Right? And once you prove future lives, you've also proved past lives. So it's implicit in there. You know, it's too long a title to say proof of past and future lives. It's not snappy enough. So we use logic to start to delve into proof of future lives. In Tibetan Buddhism and Buddhism in general, the logic is the same as Aristotelian logic. The human mind works the same regardless of whether you're in this country, that country, this culture, that culture. Right? You know, if A then B, if B then C, means if A then C. Right? It's very straightforward. There's no distinction between Buddhist logic and non-Buddhist logic in a reasoning mechanistic sense, right? But there's a big difference between Buddhist logic and other logic from the perspective of the goal and what's trying to be accomplished and what's trying to be achieved in Buddhist logic, right? So we're working with the second chapter of the Pramanavartika, and in that text, Master Dharmakirti starts to prove the existence of past and future lives. And Tibetans are actually not very good at this subject matter. They take it for granted because why? You know, they're born in a culture where when they, their mama tells them, yeah, of course there are past and future lives, and their church or religion says, yeah, there's past and future lives, and their first grade teacher says, yeah, there's past and future lives. So from the time they're wee ones, they grow up saying, of course there's past and future lives. Why would I ever question that? Why would I ever doubt that? It's obvious there's past and future lives, right? So they grew up with it. So Khedrubje actually noticed it 500 years ago. He said, everybody in Tibet believes in past and future lives, and nobody can tell me why they exist. Nobody can prove to me that there's such a thing as a past and future life, and yet you all believe in it. And why is that? Why are you Tibetans thinking like this? Right? So he went about trying to prove this, and he and Master Dharmakirti, and the proofs are very beautiful. During the course, the original course when we did the 11 classes, we went through a lot of different proofs of past and future lives. We're going to do a little bit of it in the overview, but there are basically two choices about how you can establish future lives. Right? And one of them is to simply see it directly. One of them is to directly perceive your future lives or your past lives. And as one meditates more and one gains a greater capacity to penetrate more deeply into reality, one can gain the capacity to see their future lives or their past lives. So that's one way to do it. We're not going to do that tonight. Can't do it in 2 weeks, unfortunately. But as one practices and one gains mental acuity, one is able to do it. So we have to take the other route, which is to do it logically, right? So in the beginning of this class, we've got to do a little bit of background about Buddhist logic and perceptual theory, right? How do we perceive things? What is the nature of perception? What is the nature of reality? The two very important ideas associated with understanding the nature of reality and ultimate reality, right? How do we know something? How do we perceive something? right? How do we recognize something? If we don't understand how our reasoning works and how our perceptions work, then it becomes very difficult to go further in our deep practices. So, you know, when I look at a table, or when I look at, I don't know, you know, a meditation cushion, how is it that I recognize that that square object is a table and that square object is a meditation cushion, right? What is it about how my mind functions and the nature of awareness and the nature of perception that my mind is making those distinctions and creating those ideas and labels and notions, right? Very important idea, right? So what is in my mind that can recognize those things the way that it does? So you know, who was the first Buddhist logician?
Doesn't know.
Lord Buddha. He's, you know, in his teachings, in his scriptures, you know, he taught logic, and the point of logic is to start to delve into the question of how do we recognize things and how do we perceive things, right? How does perception work? And if we get deeply enough into logic scriptures, we start to gain insight into the nature of perception and the nature of reality and the nature of emptiness. And so the study of logic is actually very important for understanding and perceiving emptiness and ultimate reality. Gyaltsab Je said the kindest thing that Jason Kappa ever did for him was to teach him logic. Because by teaching someone logic, you teach them about perception and the nature of perception and how perception works. And when you teach someone about perception, you're teaching them about emptiness. And then you can lead them to perceive emptiness. Okay? So the perception of ultimate reality, the perception of emptiness, is very tied to the nature of perception and how the mind works, right? So if you want to see emptiness directly, you have to study the Buddhist ideas on perception, especially what's called Chi-Chedrak, which we'll get to in later courses, which are translated as quality and characteristic. It's mental imaging. How does the mind create mental images? How does the mind conceive of things? How does the mind create all the little boxes that it creates to define reality? How is it that the mind says, that's a wall, that's a door, that's a person, that's a man, that's a woman, that's inside, that's outside? It doesn't just come from nowhere, right? This is dependent upon and contingent upon the functioning of the mind. They're all mental constructs, right? And why is it that the mind is constructing reality that way? And why is it that the mind is defining reality the way that it does, right? All extremely important, profound topics, right? How do we make a mental image? How do we see something? So the study of logic is very much tied into the study of perception. So what we're doing comes from the second of the four great Indian schools called Sautantrika. And the monastic study of logic, it's one of the five great subjects called Sema. In Sanskrit, it's pramana, which is valid perception of something. So, so give you an example of a sema and a non-sema, right? A valid perception and non-valid perception, right? So, how many valid perceptions do you have throughout the day? What do you say? 3? 30?
Millions.
Yeah, countless valid perceptions, right? So we're having valid perceptions continuously, basically continuously, all day long. Our life is a stream of basically continuous valid perceptions, right? When I say valid, it means accurate, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean correct, it means accurate, and we have to make the distinction, right? So, in the time, you know, that I've been speaking, you've had millions and millions of valid perceptions, right? What's an example of a non-valid perception? You know, let's say, you know, you get really jealous of someone and you start to feel that, you know, that they're out to steal your boyfriend or girlfriend, and so they're doing things which are, you know, suspect, let's say. And it's completely untrue, and it's not their motivation. You know, based upon an imbalanced state of mind, extreme jealousy, we're misinterpreting and misunderstanding what a person is doing, right? Well, for example, if you're driving a car and you know, and it's the fall and it's dusk and the wind blows some leaves across the road and you think it's a squirrel and you hit the brakes because you think there's some animal running in front of you. in the road, right? It's not a valid perception. Or you take you get drunk, or you take some LSD or something, and you think you're seeing like spiders crawling over the walls, or pink elephants that fly, or whatever the case might be. Those are also not valid perceptions, right? So non-samas are relatively rare. We're constantly having valid perceptions, and it takes an imbalanced mind to have a non-sama, right? Something which is not a valid perception. Okay, so according to this school, you're living in valid perceptions pretty much constantly. So if you have a total mistake, you're drunk or something like that, you're not having a valid perception. Okay, so valid perceptions and correct perceptions are tied up with mental images, and if you can understand mental images, then you can understand emptiness. Okay, and you can see emptiness directly. So that's why it's important to study valid perceptions. All right, atsema means by a valid perception. Okay. The definition of existence in Buddhism, it's seme mikpa yupe tsenyi, and basically it means that which is perceived by a valid perception. Right? In the scripture, right, existence is defined as that which is perceived by a valid perception. Meaning, if you perceive it, it exists. Right? Perception is reality. Right? Valid perception is reality. Okay? So that has profound implications, right? I mean, every being has a different kind of perception. I mean, a dragonfly with
100 eyes.
Thank you. I was trying to. There's a name for that type of lens, and I couldn't think of it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Compound. Anyway, you get the idea. They're perceiving a very different reality than we're perceiving. All sorts of beings with different perceptual faculties and minds are perceiving different types of reality, and it is their valid reality, and it is their existence, right? According to Buddhism, there are many, many types of beings in many realms of existence which we can't perceive because we have limited faculties. We have limited senses, which visually we perceive a very narrow spectrum of light. We hear a very narrow spectrum of sound. And so, our mind only processes a small percentage of what our senses even take in. Our mind only processes something like 5 or 10% of the nervous impulses that are even taken in through our senses. So from a Buddhist perspective, it has broad implications, and this definition has broad implications, right? I perceive something, therefore it is my reality, my world, my existence, right? So the definition of existence in Buddhism is anything which is perceived with a valid perception, right? Now, we have to make a distinction between valid and correct. There's a little bit of a trick there, right? Like, for example, if I'm gonna be in the market and trade stocks, for example, I can do market research. I can study all the macro factors and all the fundamentals and all the trends, and learn everything I need to learn to decide whether to buy or sell some shares, right? And so, apply all my reasoning, all my judgment, all my knowledge, all my resources, and then based upon all that, I make a decision and I do something. I buy some shares, right, thinking that they're going to go up, and then the market collapses, and then I lose a lot of money, perhaps, right? Now, did I have a valid perception? Yep. Based upon everything that I knew, all the information I had was valid, and the decision was valid. Was it correct? No, I lost a lot of money. So valid perception is not the same as correct. All right. So it was a wrong decision, but based on what I knew at the time, it was the best decision I could make, and it was valid, even though it wasn't correct. Okay. So we need to make the distinction between valid correct perception and correct perception. All right.
John, don't they say that when you see emptiness, you realize you've never had a valid perception?
Yeah, and so so when we start to talk about the nature of perception, right? So what does that mean, right? When we talk about valid perception and correct perception, we're having valid perceptions all day long, right? But according to the higher school, we've never had a correct perception, right? According to the higher schools, which say that ultimate reality is accurate, and this conventional reality is deceptive, right? We're having incorrect perceptions all day long. We're having valid incorrect perceptions all day long. You know, it's true, it's valid. This is a cup of tea which I drink, you know, and I go, it's a little bit hot, you know, it's a little, all valid perceptions, right? But it's not correct according to the ultimate nature of how things truly exist. You know, it's a limited perception. It's a narrow, it's a perception based upon a limited mind functioning in a limited way, right? It's not a perception based upon a pure mind functioning in a pure way. Okay, so while it is a valid perception for this limited, impure mind, it's not a correct perception according to the absolute nature of reality and pure existence, right? And then, you know, so that ties into two levels of reality. Just to bring it in quickly, you know, there's a level of reality which we live in, which is conventional reality, also called deceptive reality, which is our world. You know, we perceive with our senses. You know, that's a wall, that's a floor. I like this, I don't like that. You know, they're good, they're bad, etc., etc., etc. No problem. That's our world, and we function within it. However, there's another level of reality. There are many other levels of reality, but there's ultimate reality. There's the highest level of reality, which is ultimate reality. And that level of reality is utterly different than this level of reality. And all of the perceptions we have in this level of reality are completely inconsistent with ultimate reality. They're completely inadequate according to ultimate reality. And they are, in fact, deceiving us continuously about what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing, you know, to live happy lives engaged in spiritual evolution. So, you know, all of the perceptual basis of this life, the way in which our minds work, and the way in which we perceive, and the way in which we think, are all valid for this realm, you know, for the human realm, right? For being human beings, all valid. That's what makes us a human being. The perceptions we are having right now are valid perceptions, and this type of valid perception is the perception of a human being, and that's why we're a human being, and that's what makes us a human being. Because we're having these types of perceptions, we are human beings. If we're having other types of perceptions, we'd be a dog. We'd be having dog perceptions. If we're having other types of perceptions, higher perceptions, we'd be an angel, or, you know, whatever. So, you know, perception is reality, right? If we have perceptions of being a craving spirit, we are a craving spirit. Okay? It's pretty simple, really. We're having perceptions associated with the human realm, which is what makes us humans, all right? They're not fixed and they're not static, all right? So, anyway, we started to digress there a little bit, but an important digression. So when we're talking about valid perceptions, we are having valid perceptions as human beings all day long. Okay? They are not correct perceptions aligned with the nature of ultimate reality. They are not, the perceptions we are having here as humans are not perceptions which exist in ultimate reality. The perceptions we're having here don't exist in ultimate reality. If we were perceiving ultimate reality, we wouldn't be having any of these human perceptions. Okay? All of the perceptions we have as human beings don't exist in ultimate reality because these are limited, affliction-based perceptions. So I'll leave it at that. All right. So, given all the information we have at hand, as humans, we are experiencing valid reality for a screwed up state of mind, is an easy way to say it. You know, we have a screwed up state of mind, right? And according to the highest school, We have not had a correct perception in our entire life, and we will not have a correct perception until we perceive ultimate reality. And the moment we perceive ultimate reality for the first time, that will be the moment when we have our first correct perception, which will also be valid, just as these perceptions are valid, right? Okay. So the goal of Buddhist logic is to get us enlightened, right? And that's the difference between Buddhist logic and other logic. Buddhist logic is not just to be the smartest guy, to defeat your opponent, or to be the president of the debate club. Buddhist logic is serves the purpose of becoming enlightened. So to do that, we need to see things which we cannot perceive with our eyes. Okay, there are things we can't perceive with our senses directly. Right? These sense powers, 5 senses, 6 senses with the mind, are limited in what they can perceive and what they can engage. Okay, so every human mind in our realm has very, very subtle blocks, very subtle defects. They're like invisible obstacles in our mind. You could picture them like little clear marbles in the mind, and they're transparent and you can't see them, but there are plenty of them there, very small, subtle, almost invisible. And if your mind was free of those, you would see things which you can't see now. Extraordinary things all around you at this moment. You could see past and future times. You could see beings of other realms around you. You could see holy beings hovering around you, enlightened beings hovering around you. You could see all kinds of living creatures in the room that we can't see right now if we didn't have those obstacles in our mind, or those blocks, those subtle blocks in our mind. So we're born with them, and unfortunately we carry them and usually add to them throughout our lives, unless we're engaged in some kind of serious spiritual practice, in which case we are reducing those blocks and those obstacles to deeper perception, right? So the practice of meditation and the practice of spiritual study and practice is to reduce those blocks and to reduce those obstacles in our mind. Right? If we're actually studying and practicing properly, it tends to break those things down. It tends to remove those things. And so then they become less and less powerful as we do consistent meditation practice, as we do long retreats, as we understand the nature of reality more deeply. Then what happens is those things start to become clean from our mind, and we start to get glimpses of things which are really extraordinary and unexpected. So you start to see things which aren't human. You start to see things which aren't ordinary experiences of the human realm, right? So the way that it works is that the mind starts to become cleaner, less obstructed, and so one starts to gain glimpses of things, right? And then as one continues to clean the mind and make it more pure and more holy, then those things become more and more obvious and more apparent.
So if you see angels, you're getting closer?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, perception is reality. If you go back to the definition of existence, right? That which is perceived by a valid perception. So presuming you have an unaffected state of mind. So a state of mind which is not imbalanced by drugs, alcohol, major affliction or delusion, right? Just ordinary perception, right? So that is reality, and that is the stated purpose of Buddhist practice, is to perceive pure levels of reality, right? So, an angel is just angel is a name. It has a lot of connotations, but the idea is to see.
Like a Christian kind of angel.
Well, everybody's got their own connotations around it, right? Maybe it's got wings, maybe it's got feathers, maybe it doesn't, right? So, but the point is as one becomes pure in one's mind, one's perceptions are pure, and one's reality becomes pure, right? So calling it whatever you want, right? So that's the idea of Buddhism, is to break down those subtle obstacles. And to break them down, the first tool that we always use is to study. And to study, we use logic, and based upon logic, we start to break down those blinders and those obstacles, right? I mean, it's like if you had, like, take a horse for example. You see the horses out in Central Park and they got blinders on, and they can only see straight ahead, right? So I mean, in a way, we're the same way. You could talk to the horse and you could say, there's trees off to the side, and the horse would be like, no, I never see any trees. There's nothing over there. There's only this way. There are no trees. I don't believe there are any trees. I never seen any trees. And so you could talk to the horse and say, no, you've got these blinders on. You can't see over there. You're only seeing this way. Your vision is limited. Your perception is limited. But if you could get rid of those blinders, you could see the trees over there. And I mean, the typical response is, I've never seen them, and I don't believe you. If I can't see it, I don't believe you, right? And after a while, maybe they might believe it's possible. And so, if they start to think, oh, maybe there are trees over there, it's possible there are trees over there, then in a way they are starting to perceive them, right? They are starting to see through the blinders. And so, in this way, logic helps us to penetrate through obstacles and the things which blind us to see higher objects, right? So, I mean, I could, take time and prove to you that there are tantric deities and holy beings here in the room, right? And that would be a kind of perception based upon logic, right? Where one could start to have an awareness or a perception of holy beings based upon logic, right? In a way, it's penetrating through certain obstacles in the mind, right? And then later on, after you remove those obstacles completely, then one would be able to see a holy being sitting next to one and, in the same room as oneself, right? So we always begin with intellect and reasoning and piercing through obstacles with the mind and the mind's reasoning. And it's rational, it's given A and B and C, I understand D, right? And even though I can't see it directly, I understand through reasoning that it could be true. So that's the idea of Buddhist logic, right? It's not like there's some mystical process that goes on in spiritual things. It's not like you become a Buddhist and you meet the right teacher and they have the right magical pixie dust, and then all of a sudden, like, you go from sitting in a room with a bunch of schmucks to you go to sitting in a room with a bunch of holy beings because they sprinkled the right magic pixie dust on you. It's not how it works, okay? It's not the case that all of a sudden you go from, I'm just an ordinary guy, to, oh my God, I'm surrounded by angels or something, right? It's a process.
I've been a tantric deity before.
You go, girl. Well, and so, from a Buddhist logic perspective, from the perspective of past and future lives and logical reasoning, right? One would analyze that and evaluate that and say, what would be the cause of that, right? And so
they weren't like see-through. They were like, like it seemed like to be a form, and it was like 3D, 3D red Tara,
Well, that's, so the way that it works is the mind has to be prepared. And the mind has to have these obstacles removed.
Right.
And the mind has to have the perceptual capacity to experience it, right? And so
it was like real. It wasn't like seeing a being of light that you could like look through or something. It was like something you're talking to.
And that would be the goal, right? I mean, the goal would be to take one's mind, to train one's mind, and to prepare one's mind, and to clean one's mind, such that it can have a direct, valid perception of that, right?
Yeah, because if you're not ready for it, you might just walk away and then like screaming, or you might like just not want to perceive it and keep walking or something like that.
Yeah. You can have any number of perceptions, and so the idea is, and the point is that it's a valid perception, right? So if a person has a valid perception that says, I'm meeting and seeing a holy being right now, then that's their reality.
Right.
So from the perspective of the scriptures and from the perspective of, bless you, how to train oneself and how to prepare the mind for that to happen, it requires a process of logic and cleaning the mind and moving from mental obstacles and mental obscurations to having a place where the mind can function in unobscured, unafflicted fashion to perceive holy things, holy beings. Right? Okay. And so it's going through the learning process and slowly breaking down the obstacles. And so the first time one sees a holy being, it's logically. The first time one perceives a holy being, it's with logic. Right? And then over time, one develops and gains the capacity to see them directly, as a being that's there with them.
Yeah.
Right? So Buddhism is always based upon logic and reasoning, and the first method is always rationality and reasoning. So the Buddha based his whole teachings on logic and on reasoning. And the more you study the great books of Buddhism, the more that you see that all of the Buddhist teachings are around logic and reasoning, right? There's not one book that doesn't say you have to do it rationally first and you have to understand things clearly first, logically. Okay? And logic is used to start to remove the obstacles from the mind. And then other breakthroughs follow after that. So the first goal of Buddhist logic is very interesting. And there's in the scripture there's an important, it's a direct quotation from Lord Buddha, and there's a long Tibetan sentence which I'm not going to repeat. But Lord Buddha said, "I or someone like myself can judge a person, but no normal person should judge another, or they will fall." And sometimes the word for fall is translated as fall to the lower realms. This is from the Compendium of Stories, from the Sutras by Lord Atisha. And so when we start to get into the study of logic and the study of reasoning, they get into
Sorry,
hi. They start to get into the idea of judging other people, right? When you're in the monastery and you go to the debate ground, one of the first things that they say to you in the winter debates is, "What's the purpose of Buddhist logic?" When you walk into the debate ground, the first question is, "What's the point of Buddhist logic?" Right? And the short answer is you're not supposed to judge other people. And the full quotation is from this Compendium of Stories from the Sutras by Lord Atisha. And it's a very famous story. There was a monk in ancient India. There was a monk staying in the monastery out in the countryside, and he studied very well. He developed bodhicitta, deep bodhicitta, and he decided that it would be helpful to the laity to travel out into the villages and towns and teach Buddhism to people, right? Which he did, and out of compassion. And then there was another monk in the monastery who was jealous that he was doing these things. That monk started to spread rumors and gossip about him and slander him and essentially make him look bad. It's kind of things that you see around here in our world normally in the workplace, right? So it worked, and things got bad, and the first monk had to stop going to the villages and teaching. And in fact, his reputation was impugned in such a way that he felt it was best to leave the monastery and go to another monastery and just leave so there weren't more problems. So he voluntarily left and went somewhere else and did his own thing. And then the Buddha says that the monk who was jealous and accused him of all these things had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of terrible rebirths. The Buddha says, he had 500 rebirths as a dog, he had 500 rebirths as a monk who gave up his robes, and then he had, you don't want to know how many all the other 500 rebirths he had. You want to go, just jump in, go ahead, you get the idea.
I've never understood speaking of Buddhist logic, I've never understood the logic of this proposition, because the victim of the crime, this is not a victimless crime, right? Monk A has been aggrieved.
Sounds like a whodunit. All right.
So if you asked Monk A, what do you think about what happened to Monk B, who delivered you to this iniquity? And he had 500 lives. This sword and 500. Monk A would say, "What are you, crazy? He badmouthed me for a while."
So being a compassionate monk B, especially.
Well, even if he wasn't compassionate, if he had just any sense of I'll say human decency, in the common conventional sense, he'd say, What's the matter? I mean, this is so far over the top. You're crazier than he is. Or the system by which this propagates is more iniquitous than anything he did. So what is the moral of this story except that you personify some absurdity that cannot be named? And is this morality? Please.
So I hear you saying that you feel that the karmic ripening upon him was so wildly disproportionate as to be unreasonable.
Well, if Monk B can be judged by a rational scheme, and the scheme says, no, I am reasonable, I want you all to profit by my display of morality, then certainly it has to abide by its own regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's attributing this deserved fate to Monk B.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so he has to explain and be accountable for his own actions. Well, then the system that's condemning him has to be explicable and account for its own actions. And not, we shouldn't all just sit here and take for granted that, hanging's too good for him. And that's what I said, hanging's too good for him. So where's the rationale behind this?
So I hear you saying that, you don't like the way the laws of karma are described here, and you don't see that there's any kind of reasonable basis between cause and result.
Exactly, it's illogical. In the midst of claims of logic, it's illogical.
But he's making these claims out of jealousy.
Oh no, he's a bad guy, I get it.
Right.
But
not out of the need to liberate people or feeling that he was correct.
stipulated, he's a bad guy. The question is what to do about it, not what he is.
What does he deserve?
What does he deserve?
What's
the basis to determine
what are his just deserts?
what his just deserts ought to be?
Yeah.
You can't say all bad guys are equal,
Yeah.
and they're all deserving of the same fate.
Yeah.
Let's skin them alive.
Yeah.
Right?
So I hear you saying he didn't get his just deserts. And it
I haven't
was
heard a
extremely
system to establish that it delivers
Yeah.
the justice and just deserts.
Should there be a bit of poetic license for the sake of the story?
Well, you're not supposed to know that, though. You're supposed to take this at face value. And say, well, of course this is a moral parable. Of course we see that you get counter-justice of it. Well, no, this is somebody who's over the top, is a paranoid schizophrenic. This is a cure being worse than a disease.
Bruce, you've been saving up. You haven't been here
I
for
have.
some weeks. You've been saving up.
I'm in trend. So take it away.
I mean, you jumped in before the punchline, no less. I mean, good grief.
Oh, we all knew.
Jeez, I mean, All right. That being said, that Bruce feels that the karmic consequence was extremely disproportionate and out of line with the karmic cause.
Yeah,
Move on.
to the record.
You're gonna come back in 2 weeks for the karma course, okay?
Ah, something like that. Come back in 2 weeks.
How's it gonna get you to come back, right?
It seems like the way that I would explain it if we were to take it literally is consider the amount of lives that he affected by slandering this monk that were possibly not exposed to the Dharma because of this monk having to give up his monastery and move somewhere else.
Well, that's a fair point, but then I can stipulate, what if he praised somebody?
What if what?
What if he had praised someone else the day before, or praised someone else the day after?
So then he would have gotten karma for that. I mean, we don't hear about all of his karmas. We only hear about the ones that are a result of that one slanderous action.
So then, by your own logic, we shouldn't predicate that there were any further negatives associated with the one that's given in the context of the story.
Yeah.
You were predicating additional negatives, but that's not
No, I'm
negative.
not. I'm not. I think it's implied in the story. If he was a teacher, he's teaching people.
You're making up your own script?
You're using logic to win a debate.
Is that me or her?
But if karma is the mind and what follows, then obviously a monk that had devoted his life to studying the Dharma, who's also letting jealousy kind of run rampant without using the four strengths, or implying skillful means to overcome that, but also letting it run rampant. He's kind of perpetrating his own lives. These lives are his choice. It's not the only person that's actually making him suffer is himself and his own perception.
Are you suggesting that he delivered himself to 500 suffering lives because
Yes.
he had a bad moment, he had a bad day?
No, because that bad moment was not one bad moment, but a karmically led moment from another moment that he couldn't break the cycle of.
That's more extrapolation, that's not given in evidence.
Let's give it in Buddhist
We have to get into like debate. That's like course 13, okay? We're not there yet. So, getting to the punchline of the story. Thank you very much. The punchline of the story was, the Lord Buddha saying, how do I know? This was me. This happened to me. Forgetting about the proportionality of what happened, the Buddha was saying, you know what? I judged this guy. I said that this monk A was going to the village for shenanigans, when in fact he was going out of compassion, and I judged him and I got it wrong and caused all kinds of problems, and there is a karmic consequence to that, and it was unpleasant, and he was suffering, and don't judge people. So let's just paint it in a broad brush stroke like that, shall we? All right. So it's a very famous statement. It says, where the Buddha says, I or someone like myself can judge a person. Who's someone like myself? Someone who could read another being's mind. Right? If you can read other beings' minds, then you know exactly what they're doing and what their motivation is. You know why they're doing what they're doing. But if you can't read another being's mind, you don't know what their motivation is, and you don't know what is inspiring them to act in the way that they're acting. Okay? So, yes.
Yeah. The word judge seems weird to me, and it might be just a lost in translation type of thing, but it seems that this monk was slandering someone, like actively using verbal violence against this person. It wasn't just, like, when I think of judgment, I think of like sitting on the subway and looking across at someone and making assumptions about their morality or their livelihood or whatever. Not that I'm going to go and talk to someone else about it or try to. You see what I'm saying?
So if we think about, how an ordinary person goes through their daily life, right? Oh, they're stupid, they're ugly, they're pretty, they're doing this for this reason, they're doing that for that reason, right? I mean, all of the stories we tell ourselves, all the conclusions we come to, right? He's doing that because he doesn't like her. She's doing that because she's jealous of her. Right? So we have all of these conclusions that we come to, right, about other people's motives and what they're doing and why. Okay? And this is really what we're speaking to. What we're speaking to and what the scripture is speaking to is, as you go through your life and as you see people and as you meet people, don't judge them. Don't conclude that they are a bad guy or girl, okay, because you don't know, okay? So does that mean if you see somebody mugging somebody, you should say, oh, I'm not supposed to judge anybody. Maybe they have a good reason for doing it. I'll just walk away. I mean, is that the point? No, I mean, obviously not. I mean,
that shows to trust your instincts sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, you have to stand up to evil. You have to resist negativity, right? But there's a difference between the action and the motivation behind the action, okay? Unless we can, so what this very important and famous line is saying is, unless you can read someone's mind, don't judge their motivation, okay? You must assess their action. You must evaluate and engage them based upon what you are perceiving their action to be. If I see someone who looks like they're attacking another person, then, I need to say, hey, that's not okay, stop doing that, or whatever, right? But we don't know if they're some kind of extraordinary being who can see the future, who's saying, by doing this, this is going to help them tremendously, 3 years from now, And, we're going to talk about it, the nature of omniscience, right, and being able to see all things and see the future and whatnot, right? Omniscient beings can see, what's going to happen to you 1,000,000 years from now, and they may know that you need, to be knocked unconscious so that you don't walk in front of a bus and get killed to, affect your future or whatever. I don't know. And so the point is, if you see someone attacking someone or doing something which appears to be harmful or negative, that we have to take action. We have to help the person in need, but we can't judge them. We can't say they're a bad person doing evil. We must say, to the best of my understanding, as I'm perceiving it, right, for me right now, this isn't okay, and I have to stop it. But I'm not going to judge the person's motivation. I don't know what's motivating them. All right? So that's really the point here. You have to stand up against an action. You have to stand up against something that's wrong without judging the person. There are many different levels and many different people in their actions and motives. And there's, it's inscrutable to us, right? If we can't read someone else's mind, a person's motivation is basically inscrutable. So if they seem to be doing something wrong, we have to actively resist. But in the back of our mind, we have to leave some room that says, I don't know what their motivation is, and I don't know why they're doing this. Okay? Could be some holy thing or something to help the person, but to the best of my knowledge, this appears to be wrong, and I have to resist what they're doing. And so it's not contradictory to reserve judgment in one's mind while at the same time taking action, right? In fact, it's quite an objective position, right? And that's the purpose of Buddhist logic, is to know the limits of your direct perception. Yeah.
But if your perception is always valid and it creates the reality that you're existing in, why would you not trust your perceptions to be completely accurate? Like,
They're completely
I
accurate.
could answer this question for myself, but I just kind of want to know what you have
Also,
to say.
do you perceive yourself reading the other person's mind?
No, but based on what you just said, our perceptions create the reality that we exist in. So if my perception creates my reality, how is my judgment not the right thing to go by?
Well, think about it. You have the action and you have the motivation behind the action, right? So you can have, and we're going to talk about different kinds of perception shortly, but you perceive their action, right? But can you perceive their motivation? I mean, if you can't read their mind, you can't perceive their motivation. So therefore, you, based upon what you can directly perceive, you act. Based upon what you cannot directly perceive, you don't come to a conclusion because you're not perceiving anything. You're making up a story, right? So that's all.
Isn't there something to a valid perception? Not all.
Can I say again, please?
Can we help with this one?
Making, drawing a distinction between valid perception and a correct conclusion. So valid perception is one that is internally consistent given a set of specified.
You guys already took the course. You're getting ahead of yourselves, okay? You're gonna wait till we get there, all right? Don't summarize in advance.
Sorry, thank you. Sorry.
What's he got in for?
Sorry.
I mean, I'm glad you came to the original course. It's a good thing.
I thought Rachel was hooking herself on the concept of a valid perception being the reason. That's all.
It's not. It's just like the bridge hasn't really been drawn yet. The logic that bridges these two statements isn't solidified in my mind. Like I understand, I can't read someone's mind, but I was just.
Yeah.
I understand.
Well, let's take the next step. Let's go one step further. All right. So, normally we judge people all day long, deciding that they must be this or that kind of person. This is a good person. This is a bad person. Okay? How do I know? All I can see is their outer activity for that 1 minute, or 5 minutes, or 30 seconds, or whatever it is. And so, it's a source of collecting negative karma all day long. To say, that's a bad person. That's an evil person. I mean, we're not. How do I say this? We're not talking in the abstract. We're talking about our mind and what we're doing with our mind. Okay? So we're not talking about judgment is bad because judgment is bad in some great cosmic scheme of things. It's not like that. We're saying you shouldn't judge people like that's a bad person, that's an evil person, that's a whatever. Why? What does it do to our mind? How is it imprinting our mind? How is it habituating our mind? Okay? What does it do to me to walk around all day long going, he's a schmuck, she's dumb, they're wrong, he's just out to get her, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you see? Mm-hmm. So, it has a very direct, immediate impact upon my own mind and how my own mind functions. So this is not just some nebulous sort of theory.
Or that you're habituating ignorance.
Yeah, it's not some thing floating in the ether that we're trying to weigh judgment on. We're talking about the nature of perception and the nature of mind and what we're doing with our perception, right? And with our mind. Right? Okay, so that brings us on to two types of valid perceptions. The first one is called Nungsum Sema, which is a direct valid perception. Okay. What is a direct valid perception? What is that?
Key.
That's a direct valid perception. Okay. No. What color is this? That's a direct valid perception. You know, we have direct valid perceptions all day long. The sky is blue. You know, the lights are bright. You know, Bruce is here. Right. So no problem. Okay, it's obvious reality. You don't have to be Einstein to see that the the wall is cream colored or something like that. Okay, so you don't have to use logic to hear your own thoughts. It's a direct valid perception, right? You perceive it with any of your senses, right? So what about things which are a little harder, right? There are two classic examples in the scripture. Emptiness, which is pretty hard to see, and then the workings of karma, which is extremely hard to perceive, right? So, what's responsible for, all the lines on the floor between, all of the lines, all of the lines that are formed by the boards on the floor. What's responsible for making the lines in this pattern, right? I mean, what karma caused that? I don't know. Be very hard to perceive what happened in the infinite past to cause these lines to form like that karmically, right? So what's responsible for every hair of David's beard laying the way it does on his face? Very difficult to perceive, very difficult to understand, right? So you need different faculties to perceive these things, all right? So the second type of valid perception is called Jepak Sema. Jepak is deductive, means deductive valid perception. Okay, so what does it mean to have deductive valid perception? The results with deductive valid perception are as correct as direct perception. If I can deduce something with logic, it's just as correct as seeing it directly. Okay, so take this key, right? I have this key in my hand, right? This doesn't work. All right. You know this. All right. So, direct valid perception, right? Okay. Now listen, right? Do I have a key in my hand?
No,
How do you know?
I heard it called before.
So that would be a deductive valid perception.
Yeah,
Right.
but you might still hold it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's like a little tape recorder that I pushed the button on and the sound came out and I'm still holding the key, right?
No, maybe you put your hand down on the floor and still hold it.
So that's the difference between a direct perception and a deductive valid
Right.
perception, right?
A classic one is where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, that's a good one. You got another one?
Well, yeah, in Hollywood, they have all of this fake scenery.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's perfectly believable when you look at it in
Yeah.
a photograph, but it's really not there. So your key could just be an image or a hologram. It's a question of what is considered to be reasonable proof of a conclusion.
Yeah, yeah. And so Buddhism says whether you see something with direct perception or a deductive valid perception, equally correct, equally valid, equally accurate. Okay. And so when we try to perceive emptiness, for example, you initially perceive it with deductive valid perception. Okay? You don't perceive it directly. You don't look at it directly and perceive it directly. You initially understand emptiness and perceive emptiness through deductive reasoning and deductive valid perception. Okay? So, and it's valid, right? You start by perceiving it logically and seeing it logically. And you have to understand that all day long you're using deductive valid perception as a substitute for direct perception, and no problem, right? It's fun. Okay.
Could you not argue that the debate Rachel was having about judging another person is just a deductive reasoning, that usually people that look at me like that are being angry, or usually
Absolutely.
people that are pickpocketing someone else are probably a little stupid,
Absolutely.
or whatever it is? Could you not say that using deductive logic?
If they dress like that, they really are fashion victims.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure, it is a form of deduction, Okay? And it is a valid perception. Is it a judgment? Is it saying there's something wrong with them? Or they're a bad person? Or, is it, how to say this? To say 5 times out of 8, when someone looks at me like that, they're a bad person, right? Is that a valid?
Well, you could argue that the key itself, being an object of the human realm, isn't really a key, ultimately. So it is valid for a human to perceive that object in the way we see it, but the object isn't really that. And yet we're making that judgment about the physical object.
Yeah.
Why not the mental?
Yeah. So the point of deductive valid perceptions is that it's used to perceive hidden things. So if you say a person being a bad guy is a hidden thing, and I can use deductive valid perception to perceive whether he's a bad guy or not, that's consistent, right? Is it airtight?
No, but either is the one of the key.
Right, exactly. So that goes back to why you shouldn't judge if you can't read a person's mind. We can deduce things, right? And we can say, I'm validly perceiving this guy bonk someone on the head, and he certainly looks to me to be doing something nasty, and he may well be a bad guy, and he appears to be a bad guy, but I'm not going to decide in my mind that he's a bad guy, absolutely. So that's the idea of always keeping a part of your mind available to say, I don't really know. I'm deducing this and I'm concluding this, but I'm not certain. He could have some higher motivation, right? And so, not to go into it too much, but if you think about the nature of things, if you think about, we haven't gotten to this yet because it's 2 weeks from now, but if you think about karma and emptiness, right? You're perceiving a blank screen, okay? And you're perceiving somebody bonking somebody on the head because you collected the karma to perceive that, okay? In that moment, when you're watching your past karma ripen as a guy hitting someone over the head, you are collecting your karma, okay? Which will ripen in the future. Okay? So at that moment, if you say, he's definitely a bad guy, self-existently, doing a self-existently bad thing to another self-existent bad guy, what have you just done? You've, through ignorance, right, you have created more self-existent future stuff, right? If you understand karma and emptiness and the deeper nature of things, and you say, preferably, we're in course 4, not in course 5, but if you're in course 5, you would preferably say, I'm seeing a guy hit somebody over the head, because I collected that karma in the past, and I want to be aware of the nature of karma and emptiness, so I don't collect that karma again in the future, right? To perpetuate that. Well, we're just in course 4. We're not yet to course 5, so we're working at that level. So at the level of course, so in course 4 and in logic, we're saying, look, work with your mind in a way where you keep part of your mind to say, I don't really know what's going on self-existently.
So then can't you argue the same about the person being hit over the head? Maybe if I reserve that, then I'm saying maybe being hit over the head could be a good thing for that person.
Could be. It could be a high bodhisattva hitting this person over the head, because if they didn't knock him unconscious, he'd get murdered like 5 minutes later.
So then my ethical dilemma is, should I let the person be hit over the head?
Yeah, and so then we go back to the original issue, which is, if I'm standing there and I'm seeing somebody get mugged, do I sit there and go, oh my gosh, maybe this is a bodhisattva that's going to prevent them from being like hit by a train in 3 minutes, and I should let them knock them down the steps, right? But then we're not living in a functional, valid reality. And this is our valid reality, where we have to function and live according to this valid reality. So this is why this is such an important statement. And this statement is very clear in saying you must act based upon your conventional reality. You must act in your world based upon the things you see in a normal, conventional sense. If you see someone doing harm, if you see someone doing evil, you must say, it appears to me you're hurting somebody, buddy. Stop hurting them. And I don't really know what you're up to. I don't really know why you're doing it, but stop punching them anyway. That's all. You see what I mean? Because yes, there are infinite possibilities as to what their motivation could be, and there are infinite possibilities as to what the outcomes could be if you stop them or if you don't stop them. And so the Buddha is saying here very clearly, if you're not omniscient, don't go there. Right? Okay. Go ahead.
I might go off tangent, but is like being like clairvoyant, or is that like is that a product of or a result of like subtle deductive valid reasoning, or is it a correct perception?
I'm sorry, is being omniscient clairvoyant?
No, yeah, well, it's
Developing clairvoyance.
yeah.
Clairvoyance meaning you can see the future, meaning what?
Well, I guess meaning so if you could read somebody else's mind,
If you can read someone else's mind, is that what?
is that deductive? I know it's not the same thing as deductive valid reasoning, but is it a correct perception?
Is it a valid perception?
No,
Is it a
correct
correct perception? I don't know. I mean, I could have look, if I could read your mind and I could say, oh, Stephen is thinking, oh, this is really boring. I want to go out to have samosas right now. I might be having a valid perception of reading your mind. You might be thinking, I really got to go to the bathroom. So what's the correct perception? I don't know. You see what I mean?
No, but to actually read someone's mind.
Are you looking for the causes or the formula in which to read someone's mind?
Well, like they say, like if you like through meditations you develop certain things, and to read, not to be able to read someone's mind is like not like what I'm going for, but is it like a correct perception?
So
is it always correct, or is it something that you've just like? Is it like a very good deductive reason?
So let me say so. Let me say it this way: if I say to you, Stephen, I just read your mind, and you were thinking I'm going to go have samosas, and you go, wow, that's exactly right, then I just had a correct, valid perception.
Okay.
That's all.
Because I feel like you can develop good instinctual
Intuition or awareness
things,
or
yeah.
yeah.
If
Okay.
you meditate enough, you can look at someone's face and like figure out what they're thinking, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. You had another question.
I did. Well, it wasn't really a question. It was more of like.
It's more of what the hell are you talking about? Go ahead.
Hector's example.
Yeah.
So my kind of gut reaction to it was not like whatever your conventional reality is. So if someone is a higher practitioner and they are able to have a valid perception, or a direct perception of the fact that this person getting mugged needs this, then they shouldn't act, right? So it's not just like what's conventional morality around me, it's what's conventional for my mind. If my immediate impulse when I see something that 90% of the people in this room would say is wrong, but my immediate impulse is that this is good, this is a good thing that's happening to this person, I should not act, because it would be going against what my mind stream is kind of creating as a goodness, is saying this is a good action. So it's not, you shouldn't withhold, right? You shouldn't withhold yourself from doing something that you know is good.
Sure. I mean, so again, to the best of our understanding, to the best of our ability, using our best judgment, we have to do the right thing, meaning the thing which benefits other people and which resists harm to other people. That's all.
And the other thing was, a lot of these examples tend to be really hyperbolic, I think, for good reason, because it gets us more invested in the teaching. But what I'm kind of taking from this also is, don't judge in any way. So not just is this a good person or a bad person, but is this person really smart, or maybe they're not so smart, or is this person going to meet me on time because they're punctual, or are they not going to meet me on time? Like, it seems that making any predictions about behavior based on the past or based on deductive reasoning is ultimately habituating ignorance. Would you agree with that?
I mean, when you talk about ignorance from a Buddhist perspective, you're talking about ignorance of the ultimate nature of reality.
Yeah.
So, anytime you're talking about something existing in any other way, anytime you talk about something existing in a self-existent fashion, you're talking about ignorance. Anytime you're saying this thing is self-existent, then there's ignorance.
Right.
I want to mention that one of the best examples for that, I think I heard Lama Boss say that, but it's very Vedanta thing, is the story of the rope and the snake.
Mm-hmm.
In which, a man go in the forest in the dark, and he sees something crawling and he's really afraid, and he thinks it's a snake, but then he look from closer look and he sees it's a snake, it's rope. So there is no reason to relate in the way he sees the snake, and this is the metaphor for basically our ego, which we have, even though we have a correct perception, it's not valid. We think it's something which has its own existence, and when we kind of investigate it, we see that it doesn't. It simply aggregates, like thought, feeling, all of this sensation which cause something that doesn't really exist, not in the same way. So this is which is a lot.
So, thank you. So we have hidden levels of reality and obvious levels of reality, right? Direct perception and deductive perception. So I'm going to ask you: is the color blue hidden phenomena or obvious? Is it a hidden reality, hidden level of reality, or not? If I say, here's the sky is blue, is that a hidden reality?
No. Depends for who.
Yeah. It depends upon who's looking. If a blind person is there, the blue sky is a completely hidden reality. They can't perceive it at all, right? For an ordinary person, a blue sky is a direct, valid perception. And everything is like that. Everything in existence is like that, right? So, for an enlightened being, nothing is a deductive, valid perception. Everything is a direct, valid perception. There is no hidden level of reality for an enlightened being. Okay? But, for somebody who can't see, colors and all sorts of phenomena are hidden reality. I mean, think of a blind person. You could say to them, cars, they start and they stop based upon these things hanging over the street, which are electric. And they turn red or they turn green based upon this electric thing making a red light or a green light. Car stops or it goes, and you can cross the street or you can't. Right? Now, if you can't see red or green, you don't even know what it looks like, and you don't know what this electric thing in the street is, and all of the rest, it's all hidden, right? It's just something they're trying to wrap their mind around. Like, oh, well, I've never heard of such a thing, or I've never seen
It's
such
like
a
someone
thing.
from the past suddenly in the year 2014.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. So they could say, oh, that's logical, I understand that, but they don't know what red and green is, other than what they can try to perhaps understand from your description, right? But but they perceived red and green in a way, and they perceived a traffic light in a way, right? Using a deductive, valid perception of a deeply hidden phenomena for them, which is a very obvious phenomena for us, right? So
it's colorblind.
Yeah.
So for the past,
Yeah.
it's colorblind.
Yeah. So let's take a quick break there, and then when we come back, we'll continue on. Okay? Because we've gone off on many tangents, and
Thank you.
but it's
Thanks.
good. It's
Yeah.
good. It's good.